Welcome back to the Anti-Meta Club. Unfortunately, I'm getting flashbacks this week of that Daytona race with the Ford GT. There's not much we can do against the meta, but we're gonna try. Let's get into it. The Lexus SC430 is the anti-meta car of the week. It is definitely pretty useless against the Mercedes, just like the rest of the cars, but it does seem to be the fastest of the non-Mercedes cars. This week is pretty difficult when it comes to fighting the meta, but we're gonna do what we can. I was able to quickly put the SC430 into 43rd overall just a few minutes ago, but there are a lot of cars that work in time trial. The big issue is the Mercedes has such incredible top speed that in slip, it can pass absolutely anything, and there's nothing that can pass it, especially when it also has slip. So quali won't be too difficult, it's just the race. Settings are available as they have been for the past few weeks, and these are the settings I used, which should help you a little bit on the slower corners. As we're starting a new lap, we want to be in third gear coming out of the last chicane, so we have a lot of good momentum. We don't have to shift, which should save us just a little bit of time. Going into the first corner, it's okay if you use the curbs, and what we want to do is look for this first total sign on the right, and that is our braking marker. I like to get down to third gear before turning in, and my turn-in point is right before the final total sign. If you use second gear to rotate, which is totally fine, just get back up to third gear before you get on the throttle, and be very careful when you're over the curbs. You can abuse the curbs a lot, as you can see, especially on this exit, but if you're too harsh on the throttle, you're going to cause the car to slide or hop around, and of course that's going to make you spin or just lose time. Turn in once you get off the curb here and set yourself up for braking. When you see that colored barrier on the left disappear out of your peripheral vision, that's when you want to brake. Turn in right before this access road on the right, and you can use third to rotate. I actually shouldn't have. I think I lost a little bit of time. I could have kept up the momentum and hit the inside, staying in fourth, but we didn't lose too much time here. You can stay full throttle as long as you hit that curb late, but if you hit it early and you go into the bollards, you're going to lose a lot of time. We're going to look for the blue part of the track on the right, and right when we get all the way up next to it, that's when we're going to hit the brakes. We're going to tap them just slightly, staying in fifth gear, and you're going to try to abuse these curbs as much as you can. You just need the left tires on this first curb here, and you only need the right tires on the next part of the exit curb. I was a little bit too late, so I had to turn back on the track so I didn't go over the white line when there was no curb there, but I don't think I lost too much time. If you can steer even less than that, then you're going to have a lot more momentum and you'll be going faster by the next braking point. Jumping forward to the first chicane, once you start seeing all of the blue and white meter boards, you know you're about to hit the brakes. When you get to the 100 meter board, we're going to brake hard, but immediately start trail braking in. If you hit this perfectly, you should have just your left tires on the curb here. You want to abuse them as much as you possibly can. Third gear over that one, drop to second for rotation, and as soon as you get over it, we're going to be in third gear and we're going to get on that throttle. If you imagine a line coming off of that curb, that is the line where the track limits are. It's not the white line. The next one's completely different though, so pay very close attention to my line on the next one. Once again, looking for the white and blue meter boards on the right to know we're about to hit the braking zone. We want to hit the brakes directly after the 100 meter board here on the right. We're going to keep a bit more speed going into this one though. We're going to stay in fourth gear, and we do want to just put our right tires on this first curb. Of course, we're going to put just our left tires on the next curb, hitting it right about the center. And when we exit, however, we have to make sure we don't go over this white line until we're right next to the curb right here. Crossing this white line any earlier than this is going to give you a penalty. It's really frustrating because it doesn't actually match up with the limits on the first chicane. After another very long straight, the blue and white meter boards indicate when we're about to brake. Just before this kink on the curbing is when we're going to hit the brakes. I braked just a little bit too early here, which you're going to see on the exit of the corner. We can take pretty much a straight line all the way to the white line, making sure we don't go 4 tires off the white line, but you can go over it. And when you turn in here, you do not want to hit the curb like I did. Using a little bit of the curb is okay, but you'll notice that I actually had to wait to get on the throttle, which really slowed me down. After another really long straight, in case you were zoning out, the Toyota Gazoo Racing banner can really help you determine when you need to hit the brakes. Just after the 100 meter board on the left, there's a little bit of green on the track, and right at the end of that is when you're going to turn in here. You want to use the curb, but not go all the way over this line, and when you're all the way past the curb, that's when you're going to hit the brakes. Steer yourself all the way to the right, downshifting to third, and then use second only if you feel like you need to. I've actually used third gear, but I felt like I was going fast enough that I wanted to rotate the car. I think that actually made me apex a little early, so I went too wide over the curb and unfortunately lost a little bit of time there, but it wasn't too bad. Hit the brakes right before you get to the 50 meter board here on the left. I actually think I braked early enough, but I didn't turn in early enough, so I completely missed this apex, unfortunately. You can use first gear to rotate, but it's really not necessary. Just turn in a little bit earlier than I did, and you'll be fine. I went up on the curb, which kind of delayed being able to get on the throttle, but again, it wasn't too bad for that sequence. I do think I lost more time there than the rest of the track, but again, not too bad. I see a lot of people going wide and treating these little kinks like individual turns. They're really not. You can just hug them and stay really close to the inside. Approaching the Porsche curves, we're going to look for these blue signs here on the left, and right at the first one is when we're going to hit the brakes, drop down to 5th, and turn in. I actually braked too early there and then ended up going over the grass here, which pushed me wide on the exit, so I had to lift off the throttle. If you hit it right, I don't think you have to lift off the throttle at all. I had to lift off again because that was messed up, losing a little bit more time, and again, I don't think you have to lift off at all if you do hit it right. For this next corner, you want to lift off the throttle a little bit, use the curb a lot, and then turn in here before you get to the red sign. Focusing on momentum rather than a really wide line into this right-hander, I like to just hug it, get on the brakes a little bit, and then back on the throttle as early as I can, making sure I can stay really close to the grass. Turn in before you get to this RMC sign here on the right, and I actually lifted entirely off the throttle and touched the brakes, which I think caused more oversteer than it helped. I've actually gone in with just slight throttle entering there with more grip on the front, so I think it's actually superior to stay slightly on the throttle. Next up, we're going to look for the pit entry and use that as a marker to move over, use more of the tarmac, and right before you get on that curb, we're going to hit the brakes. Try to just barely clip the inside of that curb as you turn in, and we're going to immediately trail brake getting to 4th gear, then down to 3rd gear for the next right-hander. Completely off the brakes and even adding a little bit of throttle if you can. Don't worry about going all the way right, because we can go all the way over this curb like a monster truck, avoid the red part of the curb there on that right-hander, and then use all of this runoff, being really gentle on the throttle, because if you spin out there, you're going to be very sad that you wasted 3 minutes of your life. Alright, full speed this time, and before we get really into the details, I have to apologize because I'm actually in a bit of a rush, so I don't think this is quite up to my usual standards, so I'm sorry if this isn't quite as helpful as I usually am. For these first corners, like I said in the breakdown, we want to go as much over the curbs as you can, and that's really a theme for this entire track. What's really unfortunate about that is it's really easy to get a penalty if you're not exactly aware of where the track limits are, so just be careful, and you're going to have to spend a lot of time experimenting with how much over the curbs you can go. Like I mentioned with this right-hander, I didn't use enough of the curb, and so I had to steer a lot coming off of the exit, and that definitely slowed me down. It also delayed when I got on the throttle, so I think we probably could have gotten maybe a full 10th, maybe even more, in this straight leading up to the first chicane. For the breakdown, I fast-forwarded through these really long straights, but I think it's actually important to get in your mind exactly how long the straights are, because if you're like me, you can get bored on the straights, and if you don't know exactly what to look for, you can get yourself in trouble by zoning out. I also mentioned I didn't use enough of that first curb, and it's true, you only want to put just your outside tires on the curb. I did a much better job on the first curb on this next chicane than I did on the first one, but yeah, you get it. I'm really cautious about these straights too, because the very first time I got a top split pole position in the Manufacturer's Cup, I braked 100 meters early here and caused a huge wreck and ruined my entire race. On this one, you want to be extra brave and brake after that marker, but yeah, you can see I put just my outside tires on that curb, and that's how you want to do pretty much all of the chicanes here. I say a lot of the exact same thing a lot of the times because, of course, pretty much any track breakdown is the same, but it is extra important the longer the straight to make sure that you are very, very early on the throttle. There are limits to how early you can get, but a millisecond at the beginning can be an entire tenth at the end. So make sure you're really, really maximizing the straights. Like I mentioned in the breakdown, going over the curb that much delayed how fast I can get on the throttle, and like I just said, a millisecond can equal a lot more at the end of a straight. Any mistake you make at the beginning of a straight will be magnified by the time you get to the end. I still see a lot of people treating these little kinks as if they're full-on corners. They'll go all the way left, cut across it, and then track all the way out. That really just wastes your time. You can really hug the inside for those. On this corner, I got on the brakes really hard, and it probably caused me to understeer and didn't make my braking as effective. You can be a little bit more gentle on the entry to that corner, and then get fully on the brakes when your car is straightened out. Like I said before, I missed that apex because I didn't turn in early enough. I think I braked at the exact right time, maybe even a little bit too early, but I turned in too late, and so I missed that apex really easily. For those really tight corners, you don't need a late apex them. You want to turn in a little bit earlier than I did, and you should be able to hit that apex just fine. When I was breaking this down, I realized how much time I really lost on all of this, so it's kind of a miracle that I'm in 43rd globally. I think a lot of people just aren't doing this. But if you hit that first Porsche curve really late, then you can stay on the throttle for the first two. I had to lift for both of them. And this left here, I got all the way off the throttle really suddenly, tapped the brakes, and I think that just caused understeer. If you gently lift off the throttle, you might have more grip in the front rather than just fully lifting off. You want to try to carry as much speed into this, just like always, but you can go way, way faster than you might imagine, so experiment with really diving deep into that chicane. Bam. There you go. That's how we lapped there. Like I've said a few times in this video, it's really reminiscent of the Daytona race where we had the Ford GT, which was incredibly fast but also handled pretty well on the infield. So you could use the Pug VGT that didn't quite handle as well in the infield but had incredible top speed, and pretty much everything else was nearly useless. Even the almighty Supra, which was still meta at the time. I should say meta for every other situation at the time. There are at least 3 cars within this class that can do a time trial lap at pretty much equal pace. But when it comes to the race itself, the AMG is so incredibly fast in slip that there's pretty much nothing you can do. If you are in an AMG slip and you're close enough, then you can go slightly faster than it, but the brakes aren't quite good enough on this car to be that much better than the AMGs, so you really have to dive to try to make anything work. And depending on where you are, it's probably just going to pass you again because there are so many incredibly long straights on this track. The DTM is almost as fast and handles a lot better through the Porsche curves. The NSX isn't quite as fast, but it does handle really nicely. And of course, the modern Super GT cars, the GT500 cars, are incredibly fast in all of the handling sections, but are nowhere near fast enough when it comes to the straights. I do believe this car handles better in the wet, which is actually one of the main factors of this race coming up. But again, the AMG handles really, really well on top of having the monstrous speed, so really we're just out of luck as an anti-meta group here. I wish I didn't have to admit defeat, and I'm not exactly admitting defeat because I guess you'll see at the end of this race how well I was able to do, but that had to do with a lot of other factors, and you can probably guess what's going to happen if you're looking at the sky right now. That's right, we peeked at the radar before the race and everyone put on intermediates, almost everyone. Anyone who had experience with this did. As you probably know, you want to be really careful when it comes to a lot of people battling in high-speed sections, and as you can see, it was a very good thing I was paying attention. Because of that, I didn't get a great entrance into the chicane, and because of that, I didn't get a good exit either. But it wasn't terrible. I was only 0.3 and now 0.4 behind those guys, but because the AMG was able to get a really good exit, he was able to get directly in front of me. But here is where things get a little bit interesting. He moved in front of me, and he had slip in front of him, but when I was this close, I was able to get in front, or stay in front of that other AMG who didn't have slip. So the one situation when we really do have, not exactly an advantage, but when things are even, is when we have slip, but the AMG doesn't. I wasn't necessarily going for a dive, I was just going to brake at the normal place and hope that he was going to brake a little bit early. He did, but unfortunately he also wasn't paying attention to where I was and wasn't ready for it, so he pushed me off the track, and I was really lucky not to get a penalty there. If you've done any of the daily races here at all over the past year, then you're probably really familiar with the automatic ghosting that happens in the slower corners. I actually do not like it, but I can live with it, and it's especially hilarious because you can just drive through cars and not have to worry about it. If you watch my TGR Cup video when I was racing with Sosa, I actually used that to my advantage, and I was able to pass him and other people by driving straight through them, but of course they were able to do the same thing to me, and it's really just part of the strategy when racing here now, unfortunately. But it also doesn't really quite matter because, as you saw, I got a much better exit than that other guy, and it didn't matter because the AMG is just too powerful, it's too meta. It's not useless, however, and of course, that's the same with any of these races, but you can expect a lot of people to be making mistakes. That car's facing the wrong direction, this guy next to me has a penalty already, people are running into each other, but that has nothing to do with this car, unfortunately. That's just people driving. And that's going to be part of the strategy on any of these races. I can tell you, going into the Porsche curves, these guys will not be able to pass you if you're already in front of them. But staying in front of them is the issue. And when they're in front of you, it's going to be really difficult to pull off a move. I've been pushed off in almost every single race I've done by trying to pass one of these guys. And of course, if they had better control, they should be giving me space no matter where I'm trying to pass, but you can't expect any random people that you drive against to give you any kind of space. That Bosco guy got pushed in the wall, so I couldn't avoid him, and then I got front end damage. He definitely has rear end damage, and then Shocares was able to pass, and because of my damage and the AMG power, there's nothing I can do. Speaking of the strategy, you'll notice that Fatalist Chris did start on mediums. He started on the slicks and is now going in for the rain tires, but if you can just start on any compound and stay on it, you're going to have a definite advantage. So getting really used to the weather radar and predicting by the shape of the rain clouds and their movement, what's going to happen is going to be infinitely better than ever having to go in the pits. It's not always going to be an option, but it was pretty obvious just looking at that weather radar that you should not be starting on the slicks. But some people took a gamble, hoping it wouldn't get too wet very quickly, but it's really not a good choice. If everyone else is starting on intermediates, because it's obvious, you should probably as well. Now, I say that having won multiple races by gambling and starting on the inters when it looked like there might barely be any rain, but I've also lost more races by making a gamble. So really, it comes down to experience and luck. So one more time, I want to show you how powerful the AMG is with Slipstream. There are 3 of them ahead, and even though I'm only 0.6 behind, we're going to see what happens when they're all working together, or not even working together. They just happen to all have slip from each other. And before we get to the chicane, I predict we're going to be nearly at 0.9. Yep, just about 0.9 right before the braking zone. Like I mentioned a few minutes ago, you can really count on people taking each other out, and that's one way to get a position, but again, it has nothing to do with the car and just with paying attention to how other people are driving. Now, while it's happening, I want you to focus on the surface water meter on the left, right next to the tire indicator. You can see that it is in the second third, and that means that the slicks are not going to be very good. You will slip out and spin if you touch the curbs in that situation, but the inters will allow you to drive almost like normal. You're going to have to move your braking points a little bit further back, and you're not going to be able to turn quite as fast as you usually could. You want to avoid some of the curbs depending on how you hit them, but for the most part, the inters will do pretty well. It looks like that guy did not have the inters on. And while I was talking, I passed that Nylock AMG guy really quickly, and I think that's just because he had really massive damage from the collision from before. You might have also noticed that sometimes when you set a time trial time, that it can be dry most of the time, and sometimes it will be wet. I encourage you to take advantage of any time you find it wet so you can practice exactly what it feels like to drive on the wet. I don't think any of those guys practiced. I think most of those guys had the right tires on. I just realized that's Lewis. Hi, Lewis. But I think that that other SC430 driver just wasn't quite confident in the rain driving. And I love driving in the rain. I live in Oregon. It rains 9 months out of the year here. And the only race I ever won at GT Academy was in the rain. So I feel very, very comfortable driving in the rain, and it can be a huge advantage for situations like this. I have heard people talk about the SC430 handling a little bit better in the rain, and the tune that I put on this that I included at the beginning of this video does end up being a little bit softer, and softer suspension does handle better in the rain. Just a note. With that said, if we look at the timing on the left, we are now 3 seconds ahead of everyone on lap 2. Jumping to the beginning of lap 3, we are now nearly 4 seconds ahead, and it is raining pretty heavily with the surface water meter showing it's almost in the top third, but not quite. Jumping to the first straight of that same lap, you can see that they've cut a lot of my lead out, and I think that's because the guys that were in the AMG that had the correct tires were able to fix the damage in their car. It happens automatically. They didn't fix it. It just fixed itself, and they were able to get through the traffic that was on the wrong tires. And so now I am just playing runaway. Jumping to the beginning of the next lap, you can see that they've cut almost the entirety of my lead out. They're barely outside of slipstream, and it is now mixed conditions. What I mean by that is that it's just raining a little bit. It's almost not raining at all now, and the track is starting to dry out. And this is actually probably the most dangerous type of track to drive on. If it's all rain, you know exactly what to expect. If it's all dry, of course, you know what to expect then too. But when parts of the track are wet and they're slowly changing, you have to kind of guess what parts of the track are going to be more dangerous than others. You can see the drying line, and where you see rain, it is actually representative of how slippery it is, but that's when it comes down to gambling. If you were brave enough to try to test out some of the curbs or get on the throttle really early, you might gamble and win. However, you might make the wrong gamble and end up spinning out. In the end, this really comes down to experience, so you're going to have to spend a lot of time and get a lot of spinouts in order to figure out when it's safe and when it's not. Jumping to the penalty zone of that same lap I was just on, you can see I'm about to lose my position. Those guys would have probably been able to pass me before the Porsche curves, but they both had a penalty. I did not go back and look, but I can only make a guess. One of the really interesting things about mixed conditions is it's very, very difficult to make a pass. When you've got the drawing line on track, that's because the fastest line is where all the tires are displacing the water. That also means that many passing opportunities, places where you would pass, are still going to be wet. I just hit the wall there, you can ignore that. My only guess is that one of the guys tried to overtake the other one and probably pushed both of them off the track, giving both of them penalties. It looks like it was probably a full 1 second penalty, so they might have also just been pushing too hard and both completely cut a corner, but either way, because of that, I was pretty much free. Jumping all the way ahead to the Porsche curves of the final lap, you can see they weren't quite able to catch up to me. I don't know if they were battling too much or if they just didn't keep up the pace, or maybe their tires were destroyed, but either way, we were able to stay in front, and so this was a pretty easy win at the very end. Now, again, that's not really because of the car, though, unfortunately. So while I got this win and I was able to pull off a pretty good performance here, it came down to luck and other people making mistakes more so than the car. I hate to admit defeat, but really there's nothing that can beat the AMG in a fair battle. But we tried our best. You can also ignore me having a SRDR. That comes with racing at the time of day that I do, and wild things happen. But anyways, I hope I helped at least a little bit. Hopefully next week we'll have a real anti-meta car. Thank you once again for watching my videos. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. And of course, I will be back next week. But in between videos, I'm going to be in Monterey, California at Laguna Seca Raceway competing in the Porsche Esports Challenge USA. So please wish me luck. And follow my other socials if you want a play-by-play. You can also look at the Porsche Twitch channel if you want to watch us compete live. And yeah, hope I can make the finals at least. Anyways, thank you. I love you. Take care.